I'm Terry Markham with Uprising, and we are continuing our series of It's All Connected, where we are interviewing different people about issues that are connected to the issue of human trafficking. So today we have Chris McDonald with us. He's with the Wyoming Department of Investigations. Specifically, he works in the Internet Crimes Against Children division. So we're going to talk to him a little bit today about his work and what he does. So, Chris, to start off, can you just tell us a little bit about your job and what you do?
Sure. At first, I'd like to say just thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity. So, as you said, Terry, my name's Chris McDonald. I'm the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force Commander for the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation. I'm also the team leader for the Computer Crimes Team, also at the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation. Basically, what my job entails at this point is I supervise a group of 10 men and women, both investigators and forensic specialists that specialize in internet crimes against children specifically. Inside of that, what we mostly do is we follow up tips from the National Center for Missing and Endangered or Exploited Children. That can range anywhere from production of child pornography to exploitation to enticement to simple possession. So on a daily basis, our jobs really have a lot of crossover, both with human trafficking and with child sexual exploitation. That's in a nutshell. We do so much more, but that's really what it boils down to.
Wow. And how long have you been doing this job?
So I've been in at the Wyoming, what we call Wyoming DCI. I've been employed for 15 years. That's my 20th year in 20th year in law enforcement this year, actually. So for about 14 of those years, I was a special agent who I operated out of the Gillette office of the Northeast Enforcement Team. What I did then was I mainly focused on narcotics cases, but I also worked general major crimes, homicides, sexual assaults, burglaries, aggravated assaults, and also large-scale fraud cases. So the Wyoming special agent from Wyoming DCI, really we have original jurisdiction in all drug crimes. We also have concurrent jurisdiction in all crimes, all regular or general crimes. And what that really means is we get a lot of requests for assistance from smaller communities. We spend a vast majority of our time, or a large amount of our time, taking or requesting or assisting, like if you consider small communities, say Moorcroft, Sundance, smaller communities that don't have the resources or manpower to investigate a major crime. That's kind of where our specialty lies, along with narcotics, and even more so in the realm of internet crimes against children. So I became the supervisor or team leader for the ICAC task force in 2019. So I've only been with the task force for about 2 years. I've obviously been with DCI for much longer than that. Before that, I had some crossover, worked some cases with ICAC, but generally, honestly, it's been quite a learning curve for me. I looked at my investigations from one aspect as a in the field investigator, kind of not unwilling, but certainly didn't possess the skills, or even I didn't even really realize exactly what the ICAC men and women did on a daily basis, and how we utilize technology, and how prevalent technology is in the exploitation of children and adults, for that matter.
Yeah, that you're leading right into my next question. That's kind of what I was going to ask about is so what kinds of methods are you using to find child predators out there, and how prevalent are you seeing this problem?
So, when we talk about child predators, we do a large, like I mentioned, a lot of our work in ICAC comes in conjunction with what we call cyber tips that we receive from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NIC. And what that really means is, if you think about all social media platforms, there's a federal mandate, a federal statute that says if you're a social media platform or electronic service provider, and you observe what you believe to be child sexual exploitation material, you are federally required to report that to NCMEC. So if you think about the big three, think about Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, they all have to report to NCMEC when they see or observe what they believe to be child sexual exploitation material. Think about Snapchat. Those are the very, if you think about those platforms, everybody, geez, it's crazy to say, but probably the vast majority of people in the United States and the world know what those platforms are. But that's not only those platforms, there's also so many others, from Omegle to dating apps, Plenty of Fish, Discord. These are all basically chat forums that people can go on, and everything from that to PlayStation and Xbox has chat features. So we've received tips from all those folks to kind of
I know on my end, I've heard parents tell me of concerning things on all those. And it's a huge source of anxiety, I think, for a lot of parents. At least that's the feeling I get as a parent and teaching a lot of parent classes around the state, because you can hardly stay on top of it. Every time you figure out one app, there's, 10 more new ones that our kids are asking for or using. And so it's really hard to stay on top of. Um, how are you actually conducting some of these cases? Can you shed any light to some of like the tactics that you use when you get a tip in and what that process sometimes can look like?
Sure, I can speak about that in general terms. I don't typically reveal investigative techniques, and not because I don't want. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because I certainly like the public to know how we do and what we do, and it's so hard for folks to say like, well, those guys aren't. What are they doing? But I don't like to share it because I don't want to tip suspects off to how we do things. But generally speaking, when I receive a tip, so just for a little bit of background, I kind of got in the weeds there before, but so in 2019, we received a total of approximately 256 cyber tips in a year, which is, a little less than one per day. And there's only 8 of us, well, really 7, because I don't really count myself, 7 investigators in the entire state of Wyoming that do these cases. So, if you divide 250 by 7, you can see how many cases you catch a year. But this year, we actually had almost 100% increase. We have over 560 cyber tips this year.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, that's really puts a strain on everybody. Everybody's resources are strained. Everybody's manpower is strained. But it's been a very busy, but I would say a very successful year. But generally speaking, when we receive a tip, when those come in, they all come into me. I'm kind of the clearinghouse for those things. I vet each tip. I get them. I assign them out to the specific area they kind of geolocate to, and then we review that. There's so many things that are included in those tips, including they can be an IP address, basically an internet protocol address. There can be account information, any type of investigative leads that we can glean from those tips, that we then start to follow those up. And even though it's very technical, it's really the same blueprint for any type of investigation. We then identify leads. We then write search warrants, try to prove our case by observing if it's imagery. We see those images inside an account. We can prove what device it came from and who that device. We can link it to an IP address with an address. We then write search warrants for residences and then go forward. And ultimately, in successful cases, we're able to get a suspect in custody. So, and after that, it's just like if I was working a homicide case. You interview witnesses and suspects, and the outline is pretty much the same. There's a lot of technical know-how that goes into it, but it's the outline is fairly simple, but they're very, very time-consuming cases. So, for an example, if we get a tip from NCMEC that was sent to us by, per se, this is just an example, but say Facebook, that had, and contained 2 images. If we find say there's an email account attached to that Facebook cyber tip, we then write a search warrant. If we have probable cause, we write a search warrant to that account, we then, at many times, we'll find thousands upon thousands of images inside that email account or the Google Gmail account or whatever else we see linked to that. So that's where we really, these things can really spiderweb. A lot of folks that participate in this behavior also traffic those images. So that's one of the major ways that our job crosses over with human trafficking, because these children are being re-victimized every time one of their images is traded or viewed or sold. So,
wow. How often, or can you speak to, I guess, how often when you get those tips, you're actually able to like make a conviction on someone? Is it like,
well,
I know a lot of other crimes, like trafficking in general, for instance, it seems like we're getting better at it, but it seems like it's sort of rare that you actually are able to catch that person.
in the case of, in human trafficking, there's so many other variables that make it such a difficult case to prove. I mean, I've worked those cases as well when I was an agent, and they're just so difficult. There's just so many intangibles with those cases that make them hard to prove. Where we have an advantage in ICAC is that the evidence is there. There's no disputing, because not to brag on my people too much, but they are the best in the business. They can, if you did it online, they can prove it. And it's not a he said, she said situation. It's your device at your time that you possessed. So we can get the evidence. It's difficult and time consuming, but we can get it. So when we do end up ultimately charge someone, the rate of conviction is extremely high, extremely
Wow.
high.
That's good to know.
Each case, and I'll tell you, like, not every cyber tip it turns into a case, because some are duplicates inside the same case. Some turn out to be non-criminal, because the electronic service providers, they're not responsible to say, yeah, this is child pornography or child sexual. They just suspect it and then it's sent on.
Mm-hmm.
They're just analysts. So that's our job to decide. However, in the cases we do work, the rate of conviction is, it's in the upper 90s. I don't have a specific number for you, but it's very high.
Well, that's great. I don't know why, but that makes me feel better, at least, that there's people out there like you guys who are making a difference in catching these people. I'm curious if I'm sure it changes a lot because technology is ever changing, but are there any tactics you're seeing predators use, like that are sort of a trend right now that we should be aware of? Common ways that they are exploiting children that you're seeing over and over?
Sure. So a couple trends I've seen, and it's interesting because I'm fairly new to this genre of law enforcement. So when I came in, and it's been this way since, but there's so much use of mobile devices. Prior to me, there was a lot of people would use a tower computer and save everything on a hard drive. And so that's where you really get into those search warrants, and you're seizing a lot of devices. So many times now people use mobile devices, and specifically cellular telephones and tablets, mostly cell phones. So we're constantly chasing something that is very disposable, if that makes sense. So a lot of times we want to get those devices. So that has been a big change. And how does that affect the exploitation of children? Well, it's very, very immediate gratification. Does that make sense? Like the person's on their phone, they could be on Snapchat at work, enticing a child. That's how common. Well, I won't say common, but that's how easy it is. And I would say that is one of the things I've seen. And again, this is, kind of colloquial in nature, but what I see every single day when I vet these tips is adults, mostly adult males, where they're enticing children, but many times pretending to be a child, utilizing language, utilizing platforms that children use to specifically target very, very underage children to produce imagery and videos. And then many times after that's, the first one is complete, the first image or video is sent, then the suspect begins to blackmail the child for continued, for continued content. So it's, and I guess one thing I always try to tell people is I'm not talking about a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old exchanging nude photos, which is also illegal. What I'm talking about is, adult men between 20 and 50, 60, enticing, 6 to 10-year-old children, as an example. So I always try to get that out there because I think some in the public don't understand exactly what we're talking about. So it's horrific imagery. Everything from an infant to, what is considered prepubescent, so infant to 10 years old. So
Wow. I actually, maybe you can tell me your thoughts on this. I attended a training not too long ago, and an FBI agent who was conducting it, this wasn't a statistic he threw out from an actual study or anything, but he himself felt that if your child had a presence online at all, that there was a 100% chance that a child predator had at least seen them at some point. And what was interesting about it, he was also pointing out that it's not just if your kid themselves has their own presence online, but a lot of times it's even the parents who are putting their kids out there, through our social media, and we're putting their photos out and things like that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
yeah, I can't speak to the percentage if it's 100%, but it's if a child has a social media presence, it's a very high probability that someone of a predatory has at least viewed that profile. It's not dissimilar to why children are targeted in hands-on cases. These suspects are very good at picking out at-risk children in the first place, or children that are reaching out for anything, for whatever reason that might be. So, suspects have all day, every day to perfect their craft. So it's highly likely. And, many times when we see adults on those platforms that typically children or juveniles use, they're on there for a reason, and it's not to monitor. Certainly there's an aspect of, if we as parents or as parents have our children on the internet, if it's open, the more open whatever page it is that you're on, the more open it is, the more people that can see it. So it's
Absolutely. Let's go back to a little bit the connection between your work and human trafficking and the ways where you can see a case turns from, just an investigation to like, this is now, we realize, a trafficking case. You kind of hit on it a little bit earlier, but so
Sure.
definitely when they start selling those images and trading them, are there any other ways that you're seeing human trafficking in this work specifically that's starting online, like grooming or anything like that?
Yeah, so that is, again, like I said, it's just like a hands-on experience to start with. Those internet exploitation starts with grooming. In its classic grooming, it's no different than what happens, say, in a hands-on sexual assault situation. You see that a lot. I've worked a lot of child sex assault cases in my life, and it's very similar, but it's online. So just like with everything else online, we can always be whatever the other person wants us to be when they can't, when they don't see, right? And so it typically starts with grooming, where I see it a lot. And as I mentioned, when we work a production case, almost always those cases are, those folks aren't keeping those images. And what I mean by production, they're actively sexually assaulting children and videoing it or taking imagery of that and then trading or selling that imagery on different social media platforms in exchange for other imagery. So,
Wow.
that is to me is straight up trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not in the traditional sense, but I don't see it as anything other than that. We also work, and not as much because we have so many cyber tips, we also work proactive cases. So if you think about folks that start online on any listserv. Think about Craigslist or anything like that, and not so much that's just the brand name, and I don't want to besmirch Craigslist, but anything where those personals are online. And this is where it really, I think, can have a big impact or a big crossover for human trafficking. Those, prostitution ads, when you dig, you can find, underage, young, and that's where we see it. And we also have seen young, I have seen more females, but underage females that utilize some of these to traffic themselves. Well, that's a poor use of terms. They're being trafficked, but it's almost kind of like a pimp situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And sometimes they're the ones actually posting things, is what I've seen.
Yeah.
Because the pimp doesn't want to be caught, so he makes them do it. So they look like, he's out of the picture. But wow, it's so nuanced. It gets so deep and convoluted sometimes when you start talking about the different ways that this can happen. And we spend a lot of time trying to educate people of how different trafficking can look, because even something like selling those pictures online, a lot of people don't immediately associate that with human trafficking, even though we know it is.
And I think even as law enforcement, we've done kind of a poor job of linking that. That's my personal opinion. I just always go back to every time that image is viewed by some other pedophile, that child is re-victimized. So we have child victim impact statements that these victims have a hard time even going in public, because if someone looks at them, they're not sure if that's because they saw their images or, it's heartbreaking, frankly.
That is. So do you have, I guess, any advice that you would give to general public, specifically parents, when it comes to our children and the youth that we're around using the internet?
The biggest, and I guess let me back that up. And I am a parent of a young adult and a teenager, and social media. I'm old and I don't use social media, but that doesn't mean I'm blind to the fact that social media is not going away ever. And there are plenty of great things that has come from social media, but it is a Pandora's box, in my opinion. It's very difficult to even get your hands around. I think the best advice I can give for the general public is to monitor your children's internet usage or their social media usage, for sure. And that means being on all their accounts, being friends on all their Snapchat and Facebook and Instagram. And then also, having access to that phone, because there are other parts of those apps, like in Snapchat, there's a for my eyes only portion of that app where you can't see it unless you have access to the device itself. So, I think as parents, we always go back and forth because, I love my children and I trust my children, but the hard part is these predators go after our children and will turn, they start to insulate them against the world. So, especially if there's already some, if a child's already got some, some problems at home or problems anywhere else, social problems, so easy to use that to not only groom, but to, for lack of a better term, kind of brainwash these children and then get them away. So I think staying on top of your child's social media presence is huge, is the way.
Absolutely. We say that all the time too. And having conversations with your kids and being open with them and teaching them how to safely use social media, and that not everyone out there is who they say they are. Because to be honest, it's really hard to just completely not let your children be on the internet, even if you had like a no devices rule at your home. They have access to it so many other places, and their friends have it. And so
You
at
know,
this
that's,
point, you can't ban it. Like, you can't keep them out of it forever.
yeah, and that's, you make an excellent point, and I guess I hope I wasn't sounding like you should just, I don't think you can eliminate it.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Another excellent point is, along with monitoring that, instead of what we try to do, or what I try to do, is not be draconian about, I will be on your internet, like you said, a conversation. And my kids are kids of a career police officer. So I've always gone from the aspect of more knowledge is better. To me, keeping all the bad things that can happen away from your child, I think is, for me, I thought was kind of dangerous for them, because they never know. So, an open conversation of what can happen online and what happens online, so that there's good communication between child and parent. When those things happen, it's so much easier to talk about if you've already had the conversation.
Great advice, I say. Well, so last question. If say a parent or someone out there thought that a youth in their life was potentially being targeted online, where would they go for help?
So the first call should be to local law enforcement. We see that a lot where it doesn't get reported immediately, and then sometimes it gets reported to NCMEC that comes to us. But there's many times that, like, we're in the state of Wyoming, and we know local cops and they know us. So if they have something, they typically will call us. But they're in your community, so they should be called first. And we'll work with them. And if it rises to the situation, or to the level where we should respond, we'll be working with the local law enforcement hand in hand. So, the first call should be to local law enforcement. A couple things I guess I could say, and what I've seen, and it kind of runs contradictory to, I think, our first reaction as parents. But when we see those, say, for example, a disturbing chat or image or video on a child's device, the biggest thing I can say is, do not delete it.
Yep.
Do not delete the application. Do not delete the suspect portion. Don't block them. That is, like I said, it runs counterintuitive to the way I would probably react or want to react.
Yeah.
That is the best evidence for us to be able to pursue that person. So,
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because it didn't pop in my head right away, but that's what I've heard from our DCI guys in the past. They're always like, it goes against everything you want to do. You want to get rid of that person and cut off all access, but don't let that other person know that just go and report it. And I'm glad you brought up local law enforcement, because I don't, even as someone working in the field, I don't think we associate our local PD with, oh, I'm having a problem on my kid's Snapchat, let me call the police. But it really does sort of cut out that middleman without going through, a whole, we just say the same thing with the national hotline. We're like, if you suspect trafficking or something, it's best to call your local police first, because by the time you go through all the avenues, it's going to eventually get back to them anyway.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. So I've heard just this last week, we've had several reports that come through NCMEC, but they were third-party reports, or what we would call a priority through report, where, say, someone attempted to entice a child online, that either child or victim or parent ultimately calls NCMEC. Well, that takes time. And then, if Wyoming has 500, we have the least amount of cyber tips in the United States. So if you think about California with thousands upon thousands, probably daily, NCMEC has to go through all those. So that just delays that response time. So my advice would be to call local law enforcement immediately. Obviously, if you're having a hard time there, they can always call DCI or NCMEC. But the best and the first call should be to local law enforcement.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm glad that there's people out there investigating these crimes. It's not something I think is in the forefront of people's brains, which is why I wanted to have this chat with you today, because I want people to know that, there is a lot happening and you guys are kept pretty busy. And it sounds like things have gotten even busier. I assume that uptick you saw probably was related to COVID and the fact that we have kids online an increased amount of time. Is that what you think as well?
We don't really know why that is, except that is the one outlier this year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know everyone experienced an increase, so we can only say that that would be a direct correlation to people being home, not just children, but predators.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Chris.
Thank you,
I
Terry.
really appreciate what you do and for you taking your time out today.
I appreciate the opportunity, and if you need anything else, please feel free to get a hold of me.
Thanks.